Welcome back, Board Game Crusaders. Today we're going to be looking at Dungeon Twister the card game. Now, Dungeon Twister the card game is surprisingly quite amazing. Now, is it going to do everything that all of this good stuff is going to do? Pretty close, actually. Pretty close. Out of the box, this little compact thing comes with 25 characters, which is the equivalent of the base set plus 2 expansions in that. Now, it doesn't have as many tile selections, and there's a couple little features here and there, and maybe some of the creatures that I would like to see, like this one didn't make the cut, or this one. I really like the undead stuff. But, if I could go back and tell myself, hold off on this, buy this. The only thing this is really missing from that is, on the other one, you look at the tile, you can see your character standing up, you can see the items lying on the tiles, and so it kind of makes it more of a visual aspect. You can see what's going on. It makes it a little easier. Now, this does have a good mechanic to overcome that, but I've come up with a better solution, which we're going to be covering later. This card shows us how to play the game, or for the scenario we're playing, what the victory conditions are. In this case, you score 2 victory points to win. The time, the little clock here shows how long the game should take. This one should take 10 minutes. This indicates each player gets 2 creatures, and each player gets 2 items or pieces of equipment, what have you. This indicates you're using 4 tiles, and they will be laid out like this. The little ones inside of the tiles mean that each room can contain, at the beginning of the game, 1 of the items. Now, this is the basic beginning level. There's also a little bit harder, where 3 victory points should be scored, 4 victory points, 5 victory points, and 6 victory points. Now, victory points are scored in any combination of the following. You can either get one of your characters from here, at your start zone, over into your enemy start zone. That's 1 victory point. Or you can kill an enemy creature. That is another victory point. So you can do any combination of that to get to whatever the total is in order to seize the day for that round, or that game. Next we have these tiles. This indicates that one of the doors has been opened. It also has a key there, because typically the keys are how you open the doors. If a door is opened with a key, it can then be closed again for an action point. We'll cover action points later, but opening and closing doors is one of those action points. This one, that looks all smashed up and broken, is exactly that. It's broken when it cannot be reclosed, and it has this indicator showing that it's broken. This card right here is a special card that this character utilizes, meaning that the robot has gone on a rampage and destroyed all of the walls in any given room. They can only use this once per game. That's outlined very clearly, though. If you look in the back of the book, starting on page 29, it starts covering the characters in great detail, and page 43 begins covering the items in great detail. So you'll definitely want to reference that, especially when you get into things like the symbols on the items. Now, this one may not be as obvious. The back of the book also gives you a quick reference to jumpstart your brain. This one here is, if we look on the back of here, the acrobatics. So if you put the word acrobatics with that symbol, you may see that it looks like spikes with an arrow going through it, which means, if you refer to the book, again starting on page 43, where it talks about the items, the rope will be mentioned specifically, and we'll say acrobatics is an ability that will allow you to bypass the traps on the floor. The items will typically also have a number of how many times you can use the item. This can be used infinite times. This can be used 1 time. Items and characters may have actions that have a special starburst next to it. That means that it costs an action point to use. Other ones like this are passive and do not cost an action point to use. So having the rope can be very good at getting you around the dungeon. So on the characters and on the items, you'll also notice these runes on the sides, which indicate which zone in the room the character's in. So or the item, the character or the item. So let's look over a room right now. In the room, this whole square is a room. It is broken up into zones. Each zone has a rune, R-U-N-E, in it. So when the map was built, you would have maybe this tile sitting next to this tile. Anything that's in this tile would be sitting to the side of it, and same with this tile. And not only that, but you would further indicate which room or which zone in the room that was in by the rune, R-U-N-E. So if this rune was in this zone, you would see this has the circular, I guess, the lever, and this has the circular lever. So you put it like this, indicating that this spell is lying on the floor in this room. I also promised a way that you'd be able to look at the map at a glance and see which areas have things in them. And that would be utilizing none other than these amazing glass beads, whatever you want to call them, counters. What I have chosen to do for my games to make things easier to look at a glance is I have one color that's for items, one color for me, one color for my opponent. And then say this is in this room, you place this purple thing on it. That way you may not know exactly what this is, but when you're moving around at a glance you can say, oh, there's an item in there, and then look to the side to reference which item it is. Now just a quick test to see if you guys understand how this works. Let's put it like this. So what room would the fireball or the spell be in? It would be in this room because the symbols match. So I hope that's clear. That's the way that the items and the characters are going to be referenced in a room. And so it's very crucial to understand that. Next, why not go over the characters and how they look and how they work. So characters read similar to the items. They indicate where they are in the position. They have abilities they can use. Some of them use action points. Some of them are passive. They don't require the action point with the starburst. Characters also have the attack value and the move value. We're going to go over action points in a minute, so no worries, but suffice it me to say now that if you use one action point for this lady, she can move 2 zones. So if she was this glass marker right here, she would be able to move 1, 2. Ignoring hindering terrain or whatever else, just for the sake of movement, that's what she would be able to do with her 1 action point. And then the attack value we'll cover in a little more detail later. But essentially, you use your attack value plus a card you reveal to compare against an opponent and see who's higher to win. The rooms have several distinguishing features on them. Of course, there's the rune, R-U-N-E, that indicates what zone in the room the character's in. There's also walls, which can't be gone through unless they're broken by the robot ability. These are the doors, which have these referencing them. So if, for instance, if this door was opened by the key, you'd place this next to the tile, and then you'd know, oh, that door's open, or smashed. And if the door got closed, you'd just remove this. These little arrow-looking things cannot be passed through unless you have an ability to do so, but they can be, you can see through them for line of sight, which we'll cover in range attack. This little choppy fan-looking thing is a pit trap. You cannot cross over a pit trap unless you have a jump card or a special item. A special item such as the rope. And then there's the gear room, which has this arrow. The gear room means if you are in this room, or this zone, excuse me, you can use 1 action point to rotate the room 1/4 turn in the direction the arrow is going. So 1 action point could do that. Or you'll notice that each room has a brother, or a sister, or whatever. It's got the same color. So this has got a green arrow, this has got a green arrow. There's only going to be 2 with green arrows. In each game you play, you're going to want to make sure you get all. So if you're playing with 4 maps, you're going to want to use 2 green and 2 blue, or whatever. It doesn't matter. They'll be placed out randomly. They're not always going to be next to each other. Sometimes they'll be like that, or whatever. But if you're standing in this room, you could use one action point to spin this, the way indicated by the arrow, or you can use an action point to spin its brother, the arrow direction. So that's kind of the way the rooms work. We also see we have jump cards, which each jump card can be used one time for one action point and allow you to jump over one of these. Now you have 3 of these that you can utilize at any time during the game, but only 3 of them. Once it's used, it's used. Now if you have used all of your jump cards and you still need to jump over something, you don't have any rope or whatever, you can sacrifice one of these cards, these battle cards, any of them except the 0. The 0 you cannot sacrifice, but you can sacrifice any of these other cards to give yourself a jump. Now that could be detrimental to your health because, as I kind of alluded to, when you're battling, you compare whatever your strength value is plus whatever card you secretly play, kind of like a rock, paper, scissors mechanic. But you reveal them at the same time, you compare that plus that, whoever's got the higher value wins. And some of these are limited. For instance, you only have 2 3s, you only have 1 4, 1 5, 1 6. So again, you can sacrifice any of these except the 0 to give yourself an extra jump. Well, I think we pretty much covered what these do, didn't we? We're just going to set up to this map with 4 tiles. Now when you're choosing your tiles, again, you're going to want to make sure that you have 2 of the same color. Aside from that, you want to be as random as possible. So however you're going to randomly pick, I'm just going to take these out. We're going to have these ones. You're going to mix them together in a random fashion and then lay them, oops, I'm not supposed to peek yet, lay them out face down just like so. And that is the beginning of setting up the map. Here we're going to want to establish a first player from a second player. Several ways to do that: flip a coin, roll a dice, neither of which are in the game. If you just want to be a purist and go with what's in the game, you can just put your creature deck out. Each player cut. Whoever has the highest attack value gets to go first. If you happen to tie in that, then cut again, add the second one to the first one, and you're good to go. If you keep tying, I don't know. I just kind of thought of that one on the fly. First thing you want to do then is choose your armies. Choose your creatures in your armies based on the scenario. Again, in this scenario, we are going to have 2 creatures and 2 pieces of equipment. So you can choose your creatures several different ways. You can just browse through your hand and kind of pick which ones you want to use, which ones will work well together. Or you can randomly select 2, or you can place all of your creatures face up and your opponent place all their creatures face up. Then one at a time, starting with the first player, each player picks 1. So you can kind of see what your opponent's picking and pick accordingly. Once you've picked your creatures, you're going to want to strategically place or pick some weapons or items that you're going to want. For instance, if you don't have any magic users, you probably don't want to place this. Keys are usually good, ropes usually good, but just kind of base it on your strategy, things that you'd like to do. Then each player will take turns, starting with the first player, placing the items they've selected in the battlefield. So if I'm first player, I would place an item there. As we can recall, each tile can hold 1 item, indicated by whatever's next to it. In this game, anything next to the tile, to the right or to the left, depending on which side, is what's in the room. And then again, spinning down to that. Now, I place one of my items, then my opponent places one of their items, and then again, same thing, and same thing. That's just how we did it. They don't have to all be on the same side. You have free choice. It'll open up a lot more when you play with the bigger maps. Then you place your 2 creatures, and they place their 2 creatures. Haven't given it much thought. I'm just going to grab a couple of creatures for each side, and well, you can play them revealed at this point. It doesn't matter because all the creatures have been selected. Your opponent can't go back on what they've chosen at this point. So, And when you place the creatures, it is kind of important which side is played, because depending on what happens when you flip the tile, you may or may not have to flip this as one of your move actions. We'll cover that in a second. Let's not get ahead of myself here, right? So, now that we've set the game up, we earn your action points. The first player on the first turn only gets 2 action points. From then out, so second player on first turn gets 3 action points, and then back to the first player again, they get 3 action points. And it continues at 3 action points. You get your action points very first thing. So I move myself to 3, they move themselves to 2. Well, let's say I'm going first for the demo here. So I have 2 action points, they have 3 action points. And then the game begins. Now you can spend your action points in several different ways. You can use an action point to reveal a room. These rooms are flipped down. That means they are not revealed quite yet. In order to move into them, you have to reveal them, which does cost an action point. You can move up to the value of your creature. This guy has a 3. This guy also has a 3. This guy has a 1, and that guy has a 2. So that is their move value. 1 action point will let this guy move 3 zones. Another thing you can do with your action point is rotate a room 1 rotation, as I talked about during the room portion. The room that you're in, if you're by the gear, you can rotate that room or its counterpart. Let's see, you can use an action to jump over a pit if you have jump cards, or if you've sacrificed any of your combat cards but a 0. You can use a special ability or an object that has that sunburst that we have already referenced right here next to it. That costs an action. Or you can initiate a close or ranged combat. And those are the things you can do with your action points. So let's start off with player 1, ourselves, going with our first 2 actions. Now, the first thing we have to do is reveal a room, which costs an action point. So you take the room and you flip it. This should be universal. You're not going to pick the order. I just basically take it and I flip it before looking at it, just to know what area things are going to be in. Now immediately when the room is flipped, if there's an unrevealed item, then the opposite player gets to place the item somewhere in the room, in one of the zones. Now, I say opposite player, not meaning the player whose turn it is not right now, but the opposite player of the color of the back. So if this room or this room gets revealed, I would get to decide which room those go in because my opponent placed them. With this room and this room, since I placed these, my opponent would get to decide which zone they go in. So now that this is revealed, the opponent sees for the first time what this is and gets to decide where to place it. Now maybe my opponent wants to be a jerk and put it right here, because then I have to come in, go back out and back in to get around. That's at their discretion. Basically, you kind of put this, if it was facing this way, again, it would be in this room. Facing this way, it would be in this room. And let's just say that's what they're going to do. Now, playing with my variant, you'd put a glass token indicating an item there, just to kind of keep things straight in your mind. But let's not do that for the rest of the game, just so that you can all see what the real gameplay is like. I may use the glass beads to indicate movement, just to make it more clear where they're moving, but we'll see from here. Anyway, so now we have the key established here. I've used one of my actions to reveal the room. Now, I happen to be fortunate that this is the way that I was facing. So remember how I said that these were kind of important, which way you're facing? The reason for that is because since this is facing this way, I'm considered facing this room, which means I can go into this room as a part of my action. Now, if I don't want to go into this room and I want to go into this room, then I have to use one of my actions to rotate myself to be facing that room. So that would complete my turn, getting me ready to go into here. I'm not going to do that, however. I'm going to stay in the room that I'm in because I like maybe getting the key, which will bring me into picking up and dropping off items. So let's do that. Let's use my one action, and we're going to move my character in here pick up the item, and then move back out as 2 of my 3 right there. Now let's pause there and clarify that when you are moving, you typically cannot disrupt your movement to do anything else. So if I wanted to go, say, move 1, and then use an action to jump over the pit trap to get here, I could not be able to go, well, that was, I still have 2 more because I only moved 1 to move in, use my action, then I couldn't reveal this room as a second action, and then continue moving 2, 3 into the room with whatever it may be. You cannot interrupt your movement with other things. The only exception to that rule is picking up, dropping off, or trading items. You can pick up an item if you're in the square with it and continue moving, drop it any time through your movement, or if you happen to come across an area where you've got a friendly, say you're both in this room, you could walk in, you could do your exchange, and then continue moving. So that's the only thing you can do that interrupts movement. Now this puts me in a pickle, because as you recall, we moved in, we picked up the key, we moved out, but now we're still technically facing this room. Technically the rules don't say you can move into this room as your other movement. You would technically have to stop, and then next turn you would have to respin and then pick up a movement, because you can't continue movement after using an action to spin yourself, for instance. Let's just say that's my turn. I revealed the room, I moved in, moved back out, and now this is where I'm at. We move on to my opponent. Now my opponent has 3 actions to utilize. What they're going to do, and just to kind of demonstrate some options, is they're going to reveal this room just by flipping it, commit to a flip and do it, and then the second action will reveal this room. Just to give them an idea of maybe some strategy. So they're down to 1 action point. Now they still have another action point. They can begin moving or whatever they'd like. They can even switch positions here if they want to. So that does cost, well, that would cost 2 actions. They would be able to actually switch positions. But what they could do is, for 1 action, anybody within the starting zone can not only switch around, but also as part of that 1 action, move over and switch around. So we could have the wizard primed to go here as the last action if we wanted to. But just for the sake of demonstration, we're not going to do anything with them. We are, however, going to reveal these. Again, my opponent gets to decide where to place this one, which is great for them because, you know, they probably want this. So they're going to put it right here. And I get to reveal this one because, again, they placed it. So I'm going to place it somewhere where it's easier for me to get, maybe more difficult for them to get. So this rotating room with the gear, just like that. At the end of your turn, if you have any action points left, you can bank up to 3 of those. So if this opponent had, for instance, 4 actions, and said, okay, my turn's done, I want to bank my actions, they have to go down to 3. And then at the beginning of the next turn, they'd start fresh with 3, plus the 3 that they gain. In this case, they only have 1. They're going to bank the action, just to kind of demonstrate how that can take place. So back to my turn. I'm now going to refresh with my 3 actions, and I'm ready to go. And now that my guy has the key, one thing I didn't do that's kind of a good thing to do is place the key under my guy to indicate that they have the key. Kind of helps, yeah, because I did go in there and pick it up. Kind of a waste if I didn't put it under me. So that indicates that my guy has the key. At any rate, now we're primed for my turn. This lady's going to want to move, so we're going to use 1 action to rotate her, get her primed to where she needs to be, and then we're going to use 1 action to move her in to that square. Now she has a movement of 3, however her movement is immediately blocked by this stupid pit trap, so she will use her 3rd action to maybe utilize one of the 3 jump cards that we have to place her in this rotating room. So now she is in the rotating gear room and she has a key. And that utilized all 3 of my actions. Now we move on to the opponent, who now gets 3 more actions, which puts them at 4 because they saved an action. So we indicate thusly. And from here I think you kind of get the idea. So I'm going to cover a couple of important principles that we need to know when moving. When you're moving, you cannot end with a single zone having more than 3 of your own characters in it. This game, that's not really going to happen because you only have 2 characters. So, for instance, this room has this character. If I was playing with more people, I could have 3 people of my own in this room, and then there could also be 3 enemies in that room. But that's kind of the capacity of the room. You cannot have 4 of your characters, and your enemy can't put 4 of their characters in any specific zone. Not room, but zone. Another important rule for moving: you can move through your own friendly figures just fine. However, you cannot move through enemy characters. So let's say, for instance, there is an enemy character right here, and I happen to be right here with my jump. Well, let's even ignore that that's even there, just for the sake of the movement demonstration. If I were to move my 3 value, I would go 1, 2, and then I would have to immediately stop. I could, however, move back out of the room if I wanted to the room that I came from, but I don't know why you would even move there in the first place if you were just going to move back out. As soon as you hit a character with an enemy, you must stop your movement. Now that may bring us to another important question. Technically, using a jump is not part of a movement. It's an extra or separate action. So can I jump over that to get around the enemy? My answer to that is no, you cannot. Just the theme of the game is that you're trying to prevent your opponent from getting to your side of the dungeon. It would be too easy if you could just do that. Again, if you find rules to the contrary, please let me know, put them in the comments. The object of this is to make the rules abundantly clear, not have questions, and unfortunately, the nature of this game leaves a couple of questions that I've used my own solutions for. So take them for what you will. Or if you found the rules, again, post them. Happy to hear them. Really, all we have left to cover is combat. So let's kind of go into close combat. I've already kind of gone into how the combat cards work and how the combat system works. Each player will compare their character's attack value. So the wizard, first instance, was attacking the telekinetic chick. She'd have a 1, he'd have a 2. Right off the bat, he'd be winning. I could choose to play my 0 and kind of sacrifice my character, or I could play something that would give me more of a chance of winning. But again, I don't really know what they're going to be playing. It's kind of a rock, paper, scissors. We both play face down, we both reveal at the same time. Whoever ends up having the highest value is the winner. Now, attacker or defender, it doesn't matter. Whoever wins, wins. The loser gets a wound. A wounded character gets flipped upside down. Let's say I took the wound and lost in that one. Of course, we would have had to been in the same room. This is just demonstrating combat. Now, as I'm wounded, one more hit and I'm dead. A wounded character cannot make moves. A wounded character basically can't do anything except defend themselves. If they were carrying an item, they're still considered carrying the item. However, an enemy can come by and snatch it from them with no problems, just as though they were exchanging from one of their friendly figures. Now, the reason why it's important to note that they're still carrying this is because wounded characters can be carried. Each character can only carry one item or one wounded character, which means one character could carry your wounded character while your wounded character is carrying the key, and things could be good that way. However, if your character carrying the wounded character wanted to use the key, you'd have to drop the character, pick up the key, use the key, and then pick the character back up again. But, you know, that's all in the fun of the game. Since picking up and dropping items are free, maybe you don't even have to clarify any of that, just do it. But again, all the wounded people can do is defend themselves, just like you would normally would with an attack. So if they get targeted, that's how that happens. Now, if the wounded character is being carried by somebody, they cannot be targeted directly. They have to be targeted through, I guess, the person that's carrying them has to be wounded first, and then the person could choose which wounded character to attack. Now, that's another important rule. If a character becomes wounded in a specific turn, they cannot be attacked to cause a fatal blow. In other words, if I wound myself on a turn, or if I get wounded by an opponent on a turn, then I cannot be killed that same turn. Now, if the close combat resulted in a tie, then the attacking character could use another action point if they had it available to try attacking again at their discretion. And I kind of breezed through that close combat, you have to be in the same square as your opponent. The only exception to that is if your opponent has somebody that's still in their starting zone, and you're right here. That person is kind of blocking you from going into their starting zone, so you can attack them if you'd like to get through and get your points. That's the only exception to the rules. That is still considered close combat even though they're not in the same zone. Now, ranged combat works very similarly to close combat as far as the attacker uses its attack value plus a card value if needed against the defender. If the attacker ends up going through and being larger value than the defender, the ranged combat was successful and the attacker deals its damage. However, if the defender ends up coming through with a higher number, the attacker does not take damage because they are far away. Obviously, they didn't get wounded, but the attack is unsuccessful in that case. Now, with a ranged attack, you can only perform a ranged attack if you do not have an enemy in the zone that you're in, and therefore you cannot perform a ranged attack against the enemy in the zone. So if this was you and your enemy, and you wanted to hit this enemy, well, right here, let's just flip this over. We've gone through the demos. Let's use it for purposes of line of sight. Say there's an enemy over here, and you want to hit that enemy. You cannot because there's an enemy in the same zone as you. And line of sight is traced through just straight areas. Again, you can see through these cracks. So this character, had it been set up like this, would be able to see through this crack and then beyond here to hit that target. In fact, line of sight does not stop within a certain range. Your line of sight for your range attack can go infinitely as long as there's nothing hindering line of sight. So potentially, if everything lined up just right and I had the more complex situation set up, say this one for instance, and the line of sight worked out perfectly, you could shoot from here all the way across to here, or even to the starting zone. Now, odds of that are slim, but potential is there, I guess. Finally, the last thing we need to really cover is how group attacks work. Basically, if you have multiple units in an area, let's just say I don't have any more green on me right now. So we'll say the green and the purple represent the enemy, and the orange represent me. So this would represent a perfect group attack. Let's say I'm attacking them. I would be able to reveal both of my troop units. So let's say I have these two and go against both of them. And remember, I'm the attacker. So I've got my 2 plus 1, meaning 3, against their 5 plus 2, which is 7. Then we each play one card. Even though there's multiple people attacking, it doesn't really matter. If I had 3 people ganging up on one person, it would be the same. My 3 people would compare all of their combined strength plus my 1 revealed card against their 1 strength and 1 revealed card. Or 2 on 2. You kind of get the picture, I hope. So that's kind of how the group attack will work. Then the losers, everybody on their side takes a wound. So it can be pretty fatal if you lose in a group combat. You could get all of your people wiped out. Now, in the case where there are wounded characters in that tile, again, unless the wounded character is just sitting on the ground and uncarried, they do not participate in a group combat unless they are specifically singled out and targeted. In which case, all of their friends can come through and defend, but they do not have to participate in the group combat unless specifically targeted, meaning they weren't carried by someone else, so they could be targeted. Now, ranged group combat works similarly. Let's say that let's put it back in this perspective, where I have these 2 guys trying to shoot him. I could use my group effort, so both of my characters' range attack values versus this one guy, and then play my card, and it works the same way. Or if I had it like this, and one of my guys is in the tile with him, and this guy's initiating a ranged attack against him, this guy could add into the range attack because he's still supporting, even though he's not technically ranged. He can initiate a range attack against him, and then he can support. Now if you do that, then he risks getting damaged because he was in close fray, but he would not because he is still ranged. And then finally, it helps to know if your character has a ranged attack, doesn't it? Again, you're going to want to reference to the rule book, but if your character has a crosshair, that indicates a ranged attack. Or if you've equipped something like the crossbow, which has the crosshair added, that also indicates a ranged attack for your character. Now, incidentally, if you were using the crossbow, this attack value would take the place of whatever your character's attack value is. You don't get to add them, but you do still get to play your card on top of it, your combat card. And that is the game. Pure and simple. Seriously, just about has everything packed in to the old board game. Just a lot simpler. Granted, in the old board game, you've got some healing areas you can take your wounded characters to, carry them off and heal them. But in this version, you can drag them off the board just as easily and get the point for them crossing the finish line even if they are wounded. So that's the game. Hope you enjoy, and until next time, keep on playing.